Hey guys, today we're right smack dab in the middle of the state of Mississippi. We're in a little place called Hickory, Mississippi. This is where the story of another Mississippian starts. She truly was a pioneer in her chosen field. Let's go. We're here to learn about a lady named Georgia Tann. Georgia was an infamous pioneer in the field of adoption in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. But before we get to all that, let's start at the beginning as we look around this little old cemetery in Hickory. Georgia Tann was born in Philadelphia, Mississippi on July the 18th, 1891. Her given name was Beulah George Tann, and she was older than her brother, Rob Roy Tann, by 3 years. Young Beulah wanted to be a lawyer like her father, the rather domineering Judge George Tann. He wanted his daughter to become a concert pianist, and when she was 5, he put her in piano lessons that continued into her adulthood. Young Georgia's house was kind of a popular gathering spot in Hickory, Mississippi, and the judge would sometimes bring abandoned or neglected children home with him, thinking that, he would need a minister, a school teacher, and maybe even a doctor to figure out what to do with all the kids. Young Georgia earned a degree in music in 1913 from Martha Washington College in Abingdon, Virginia. But she took courses in social work at Columbia in New York for a couple summers, and she despised playing the piano and really wanted to become a lawyer as her father had been. Under his guidance, she read the law and passed the state bar exam in Mississippi. But Judge George Tann did not want young Georgia to practice law because it was unusual for women. Young Georgia did not really have a desire to get married or have any kids of her own right away, so she took one of the few careers available to unmarried women of her time, social work. You've been looking at the graves of Georgia's mom and dad, and here's her brother, Rob Roy Tann. Rob Roy Tann died when he was 44 years old, as near as I can tell, from tuberculosis. I want to show you the whole family plot just before we move along with Georgia's story. We'll come back a little later and I'll show you her grave. If you'll remember, young Georgia had gotten a degree in music from Martha Washington College and had taken a couple courses in social work at Columbia, but really wanted to be a lawyer. But of course, the judge, her dad, believed that women really weren't supposed to be lawyers back in those days. So she began a career in social work. She briefly worked in Texas as a social worker, but soon she found herself at the Mississippi Children's Home Society working as a receiving director. A lady named Ann Atwood also worked at this home as a house mother. Ann was not married, but she had recently given birth to a son. About this time, she added Hollingsworth to her name, most likely to give the impression that she was a widow. Ann is buried at Memorial Park in Memphis, right beside her son Jack, who was killed in a plane crash when he was just 18. It seems that Ann and Georgia became a couple and moved to Memphis together after Georgia was terminated because of her questionable child-placing practices. About this time, Georgia adopted a daughter named June. Georgia was hired as the executive secretary in the Shelby County branch of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Georgia worked rather aggressively to take over the organization, and around 1924, she started trafficking children. In those days, the state of Tennessee banned the sale of children, but they did permit agencies to place children in prospective families, and the state did permit the agencies to charge for their services. The society received about $7 per child for their services. Because of societal health epidemics and the economy of the time, there were many abandoned children available or in need of placement. I found some what I consider to be rather bizarre advertisements that the society would run in the newspaper to advertise their services. People just thought about adoption and those things differently then. Georgia would get the legal $7 per child for the agency's services, but she also arranged out-of-state private adoptions. One article I read said 80% of these adoptions would go to people in New York and California. And for these adoptions, she charged a premium. For some of these adoptions, she received as much as $5,000. If you adopted a child in Mississippi, Arkansas, or Missouri, you were only charged $750. Between 1940 and 1950, the agency placed 3,000 children in these states. It seems that Ann Atwood would help with the transportation of the children, but a lady named Alma Walton would normally go to California and Regina Warner would go to New York. They made trips every 3 weeks with 4 to 6 babies. They would rent hotel rooms and meet with rather wealthy prospective parents. They were doing all this from this home that was located right on this corner here in Memphis. They would charge crazy exorbitant fees for background checks that they may or may not have done, air travel costs, and well, anything else they could think of. Many notable people adopted through Georgia Tann's agency. Probably most famously, Joan Crawford adopted her twin daughters, Kathy and Cynthia, using Georgia Tann. Other notable people were June Allison and Dick Powell, and even Governor Herbert Lehman, who signed a law sealing birth certificates from New York adoptees in 1935, adopted a child through Georgia's agency. And wrestler Ric Flair was a Georgia Tann baby. She would especially pressure unwed mothers, most any poor mother, to turn their children over to her using some trumped-up story. She arranged to take children born to inmates at the Tennessee mental health institutions and those born to wards of the state through her connections. Boss Crump, whose grave you're looking at now, was one such connection. Boss was mayor of Memphis for a while and basically ran the city and was terribly influential for a long time. Boss helped Georgia get favorable rulings from the city of Memphis and even the state of Tennessee. But Judge Camille Kelly was a writer and local juvenile court judge who would remove parental rights and provide Georgia Tann with documents needed to place the children as she deemed appropriate. About 20% of the illegal adoptions at the Tennessee Children's Home Society were funneled through Judge Kelly's court. She resigned in November of 1950, just as the results of a special investigation ordered by then Governor Gordon Browning were being released. To meet demand, Georgia Tann resorted to kidnapping. Georgia would collect children directly from the mothers at hospitals even before the mothers were released. Tann would say she liked to receive the children early before they developed rush or some other kind of infection. Georgia would take kids born to unwed mothers at birth, claiming they needed some kind of medical care. When these mothers asked about their children, she would just tell them they had died. Sometimes welfare agents would take children from nursery schools, or children would be temporarily placed in the orphanage because the families were experiencing some type of illness or unemployment. Of course, the children would be adopted out and they would have no record of ever being placed. Georgia Tann would destroy these records. If the parents who adopted the children discovered falsified medical histories, Tann would threaten these adoptive parents with legal action that would force the surrender of their children. Judge Kelly helped with that. At least some of these children were used as child labor on many farms or just placed into abusive situations. Georgia Tann bought this plot in Elmwood Cemetery in Memphis somewhere in the 1920s. We know that 19 children rest in this plot in unmarked graves. The monument we're walking up to is placed in memory of the 19 buried here and the hundreds of others who died while under the care of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. The monument says, "Their final resting place unknown, their final peace a blessing." The hard lesson of their fate changed adoption procedure and law nationwide. In the 1930s, Memphis had the highest infant mortality rate in the nation, mainly due to Georgia Tann and her practices. The all-female staff of the home were untrained and some were even substance abusers. Children were often sedated, and those who were challenging to place were just allowed to die. Georgia Tann would deny care and even medicine, mostly due to expenses, thus allowing children to die from simple things like diarrhea. While 19 children are buried here, many have never been accounted for. It's been estimated that around 500 children died while being mistreated by the Tennessee Children's Home Society. Black market adoptions at the time were not illegal, but they were considered ethically and morally wrong. Tennessee Governor Gordon Browning launched an investigation into the society on September the 11th, 1950. Tann is estimated to have stolen around 5,000 children, but she died of uterine cancer 3 days before the state filed charges against the society, so she escaped prosecution. Before the 1920s, adoption was a rare thing in the United States. Boston Children's Society placed 5 children per year. In 1928, Georgia placed 206 children. She believed in class distinctions and thought that kids should be taken from low-income families and placed with what she called people of a higher type. Because of her insistence on using wealthy adoptive families, the practice of adoption became associated with famous and influential people. This did remove a lot of stigma that adoption previously had in America. There is a Tennessee Children's Home today, and it's accredited by the state of Tennessee, and it has absolutely no connection with Georgia Tann or the Tennessee Children's Home Society.